Good morning. Today is Monday, November the 13th. And as we go through more and more Mondays, Pastor Eugene, we are getting that much closer to my number one holiday of the year, Thanksgiving. And it got me thinking, what are your top three holidays? And obviously, Christmas and Easter are a given for the Christian, obviously. But I'm saying, like, let's take it a step shallower. So on a shallow level, what are your top three holidays? Shallowly.
Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving.
No, but like on a shallow level. Let's be a little shallow today.
That is my shallow level.
Like National Free Slurpee Day, 7-Eleven.
Wow. See, that's the energy that I can get behind. So that
I've
would
never gone though.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not your favorite. Okay. Mine are Thanksgiving, number one. Number two is Christmas. Number three is July 4th. I love July 4th.
Because you got married July 3rd.
That actually has nothing to do with the fact that I love July 4th, though, to be honest with you. But I love the whole barbecue ambiance. Ambiance.
Ambiance. Pastor Eugene, how's your birthday?
It was great.
What did you do? What did you get? Like, what gifts did you get? Also, your birthday falls on Diwali this year. So how do you feel about that?
Oh, I love it.
Wait, so how was your birthday though? Was it awesome? Was it the greatest birthday you've celebrated?
The best one. Yes.
Wow. That's so nice.
At Westbrook Middle School.
Yeah. It's a good place for a birthday party. Just kidding. It's because our church is holding services there currently as our construction is going on, and the construction is going, as they say, swimmingly. There's that Celsius. You know, the Celsius has never done anything good to us, for us, with us. So no holidays for you, huh? Just 7-Eleven Slurpee Day that you've never attended before.
Probably Christmas and then Easter
Uh-huh.
and then Thanksgiving.
So Thanksgiving is upon us, one of my favorite holidays, and I'm very, very excited. And this actually has nothing to do with, well, actually, no, it does have to do with Thanksgiving. In a sense, we are talking this morning about peace. Do you know what Peace Up, A-Town Down is? Do you know what that is? Peace Up, A-Town, boom, 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 boom. That was off
sure.
Wait, what's the down for?
A-Town Down. That's what he says, Ursher.
Doesn't he cut it at A-Town?
No, dude, he says A-Town Down. Anyway, so Peace Up, A-Town Down. Dun, 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 dun. We're talking about peace today, and it's going to be great. You are listening to the Dear Church podcast in this wonderful Monday morning. See you soon. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
I'm Chunsak.
I'm Eugene Kim.
This is good. This is a good beginning. This is going to be a great episode. My name's Ursher, is what I was going to say. But as we are slowly approaching the Advent season, and Pastor Eugene also, as you preached in the past couple weeks, peace is not only a big topic that Christians talk about, but it is a hallmark of our faith, a distinctive feature of our faith. And so I want to talk about peace today, especially because not only do we, read about peace in the Bible, and have you been talking about peace recently, but the world always is calling for peace. Peace in the Middle East, peace, in this location, or peace in that location. And I think oftentimes people don't really understand what peace is. And if peace has been defined by God, then we have to try to understand what peace really is and not make peace into these different things that we think it may be. So that is our task for today. We're going to be talking about the biblical definition of peace. So with that question, Pastor Eugene, what is the biblical definition of peace?
Peace is, I think, something that we can continue to explore. I think it has many, many dimensions, wonderful things. But I'd like to start, if possible, with the peace of God being the most important kind of peace that we are to understand. From there stems all the other kinds of peaces that we might be more familiar with. So the peace of God should be kind of familiar to any Christian. The peace of God be with you, that kind of thing. But I think peace of God needs to be first understood with peace with God. So once we start from there, I think the other dimensions of peace will open up to us. So the first thing that we need to understand about peace is that we do not have peace with God because of sin, because of our depravity, because of our hearts of flesh that long for other things. And so what we have invited into our lives is not the peace of God, but the wrath of God. But it is through the blood, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that we get to now have peace with God. That means we are justified, and that through the justification that Jesus Christ has brought, we now have peace with God. That means enmity with God has been absolved.
And this is Romans chapter 5, verse 1. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. So similar to what you said, actually, Ligonier talks about two definitions of peace. There's an objective peace, which, like you said, is reconciliation with God. And then there is peace that God gives us now as an inner peace. You've been talking about a peace that's beyond understanding. And we know that the objective peace is reconciliation with God, but we see, different peace, not Reese's, different peace all over the Bible. So could you just explain that? So for example, even in John 14:27, it says, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So what is this other peace that we are talking about outside of, or not outside of perhaps, but leading from the objective peace, which is reconciliation with God?
Yeah, I think so. We'll talk about two dimensions. I think if we really meditate on it, you can find multitude of dimensions of what the peace is, because that's why, or even, considering the depths of even the dimensions that we are aware of. So here's one. This is one that many might be familiar with as well. But when we say peace to you or shalom as a greeting, what does that mean? Does it just simply mean no animosity? And it can be, just like if we have peace with God, we don't have animosity with God. But if we have peace with God, it's more than just simply an absence of animosity or enmity.
Right.
What it is we have a complete or a whole relationship with God. Once a man's relationship with God is whole, man becomes whole, because man was made for a relationship with God. So when we say, we are, people who have received peace, again, the beautiful thing about that verse, which it says the God of peace, which surpasses peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. It's just an amazing verse for me that you can continue to meditate on. It's about the holism of man. So what the peace of God does is it makes you whole. Now, do you know what it's like to be whole? And I think for the most part, people might be like, I can have a sense, I have a feeling of the times where I do some, in some ways or in some levels feel whole. But do you know how it feels to be whole completely, like entirely? And then I think people might be like, well, not really, not necessarily, but I want to. And so when you offer peace to someone, when you say peace be with you, or, you want to be full of peace, or you want the peace of God to reign over you, and all these things are said, or, even the very, very, classic greeting from the Hebrew, shalom, what we are saying is we are desiring wholeness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we want to be whole as a person. I think that's something that we've been missing, since the fall. And that's something that Jesus is offering. And that's what you've been reading. So that's one dimension I think that maybe we can go really dive deep in, but it is about a wholeness. It's about a completeness. It's about a finishedness, just as Jesus is the finisher of who we are. He's the author and perfecter of our faith. So he finishes his work, and we are his handiwork. And so we are the ones that are made whole, are being made whole through the process of sanctification. And it's the peace of God that signifies that.
Why would I want to be made whole?
Why would you want to be made incomplete, or why would you want to stay incomplete? So when you're whole, you know all these things, like you know your purpose. You can fulfill your purpose, you know, just like if a hammer was missing its head and just had a handle, that would be an incomplete hammer. It'd kind of be a useless hammer. If you were something that was made for a purpose and you're not whole, then that should disturb you greatly, in fact, to the point where, you know, your desire would be to be made whole. In fact, if you had any kind of tool or any kind of, you know, object that wasn't whole, then I think our innate desire is to see it be made whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, you know, I've been talking about TVs with some church members the past few days because of Black Friday. TVs go on sale. And TVs are now incredibly like affordable now. Like it's insane. Like these UHD TVs are now less than $1,000 easily, way below $1,000. Before it was a couple of thousand just to even think about buying something that was 75 inches or above or something like that. Now it's like half that price. But imagine you had a TV and you know that, you know, with each pixel that is lit up, right? It produces a color and they all form a picture for you to watch that's enjoyable. But imagine like 10 pixels were gone, or 100 pixels were gone, or 1,000 pixels were gone. It would bother you greatly because you wish to see it whole. Because when it's whole, you see what it's meant to produce. It's what it's meant to shine on. And same thing with us. Why would we want to stay incomplete? Like our desire is to be made whole. I think that's the innate desire that's put in man. And so whether you think you're a person of faith or not, doesn't matter. What's in us is we long to be whole. And we try to put things in ourselves that are not going to make us whole. That's why, let's say, go back to the TV example, a bunch of pixels are missing. And instead of, you know, replacing those pixels correctly, you decide to put in like charcoal or something like that.
What?
Yeah. Why would you do that? But they're not pixels. They're not going to do what it's supposed to do. But, you know, you're just like, as long as it's filled, it's okay. Actually, it's not. And you'll never feel whole. You'll always feel like something's missing. And so there's always arguments back and forth. Like, well, it's better than having broken pixels, isn't it? Just to fill it with charcoal. It's like, no, they're both pretty bad. And the answer to, well, the solution to what we have, the problem that we have is the peace of God, the peace that cannot be given or filled with the world. The world does not have the pixels to replace our missing ones. It's only the manufacturer that has it.
Yep.
And our manufacturer isn't from this creation, because the manufacturer of the heavens and the earth is God. And so God is the one that replaces it. God is the one that makes us whole. And so because of that, we understand what Jesus says. It's a peace that the world cannot give, because the world didn't make you. It's God who made you. And so Jesus gives us this peace. It's not only an absence of enmity, it's a making whole of what we once were. And so we always long, that's why even psychologists and all these other thinkers really understand that man has always longed to go back to Eden. And what was primary in Eden? Number one, it was without sin. But even before that was we had a relationship with God. God walked amongst Adam and Eve in the garden. And so that's what we really long for. We long to be with the Lord, and because that's what we were made for. And because of enmity, we are separated from God. So it's not simply like an absolvement of enmity, but it is a completion of who we are. That's peace.
So what you're saying is peace is, if we're going to have kind of like this twofold definition, First and foremost, it is peace or reconciliation with God. And from that reconciliation flows an inner peace, which is a wholeness that we have in Christ. And it's a wholeness that we desire because that's what the earth has been groaning for since the fall. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And so it's even in the Bible where it says the earth is in labor pains.
Yeah.
You know, we're longing for this new birth. We're longing to be complete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why I even ask the why do I want to be whole or fulfilled is because I think that's a common response that some people give to our faith, to the truth is why would I want to be saved? Why would
Well, what is
wanna be?
what is the consequence of brokenness, of incompleteness, of an unwholeness?
Mm.
The consequence is disaster.
Yeah.
It is a breaking down. It is when you have something, let's go back to the tool example. When you have something that is not whole and you're trying to use it, it'll further break down the tool. It just won't function well. It won't do what it's meant to do, but it will damage the tool as well. And so you see a continuing, degradation, a decaying
Mm.
of the self. As long as you're not whole, you'll continue to go down that that slope, the slippery slope. I should maybe something that we have heard of a lot.
So even with that too, I think perhaps there is a lack of fear of hell, or maybe there's a misunderstanding of hell, a misunderstanding of the wrath of God. And so when we talk to our friends or coworkers or family members, there seems to be a lack of seriousness or a lack of urgency about their destination if they're unbelievers. And that's where the question comes in, right? Why would I want to be whole? Like who says I want to be whole? Maybe I don't want to be whole. I'm wondering, when we evangelize, when we talk about our faith to our family members, friends, and coworkers, and they have this kind of response, how do we make hell and God's wrath more palpable in a sense? Because if they really knew what was coming, then they wouldn't be thinking this way.
Well, if you don't, someone who talked about hell more than anyone else, we understand, is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ gives a parable about a tree that does not bear fruit. And then they ask, what should we do with the tree? And he said, well, can you give it one more season? And then if it still doesn't bear fruit, we could chop it down.
Mm.
There is something, there's always a use for something. And if you won't do what you're supposed to do, then you'll be used for something else.
Yeah.
So if you're made to glorify God with worship, with praise, with, giving him honor, by doing his will, with joy, with glee, with gladness, then the Bible does warn us. Jesus Christ himself warns us that we will be chopped down and thrown into the fire, at least for a little bit. You'll keep someone warm. Something to that effect. That is a very scary, scary judgment, a punishment. And it's not something that we can even say isn't deserved. If a tool isn't used, even a tool that isn't used, we would say would be thrown away.
Yeah.
And we would have other uses for it if it's not used. I'll go back to the hammer example. If the hammer is missing its head, you'll use, the handle for something else, which will further damage probably the hammer that it was initially, formed for. And it could be to be thrown into the fire to keep, your kids warm or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it's useless as a hammer. And so that's a very scary thing to think about, but it's a real thing. We even do it here on this earth. And so to think well, I don't want to think about that. No, you think about it all the time. We always make judgments, even us as imperfect, not all knowing, not all wise, but even with our limited knowledge, we take things that, that were meant to do something. And if it doesn't do that, we have other uses for it. And a lot of times it's just to be thrown away into the garbage or to be repurposed into something else. Which wouldn't be the original purpose of what it was made for.
Yeah. But I don't think that would fly too well in a conversation. How do you do that? Like, you don't say, hey, you were made for the dumpster. Like, how do you?
No, I don't think people are made for the dumpster. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Ecclesiastes, Solomon says that God has set eternity in the hearts of man.
Yeah.
We have a longing to be complete, to live forever, not just forever, but eternity always points to God, because God is the forever. So why would man, if he was simply a material being, long for anything outside the material? Why would man long for anything outside of space, matter, and time if that's all man is? But man obviously is more than space, matter, and time, because man in their most inner being longs for something more. And that's why we even think about interdimensional stuff. We look into string theory, the multiverse theory, and all these other theories, because we long for things outside of space, matter, time. But the Bible already talks about that. The Bible already talks about God setting in eternity in the hearts of man. So if God set eternity in the hearts of man, we have to acknowledge that we were made for God.
Yeah.
And if you acknowledge that, then there is a way to God, because sin is what has brought enmity against us with God. We have placed ourselves against God, rightly incurring the wrath of God, justly deserving his punishment. But it is because of the mercy of God, his pure mercy, that he sent his only son, Jesus Christ, to save us. And so those who place their faith in him have their relationship restored back with God. That means God raises up from the dead. He raises up from what, his wrath incurred, and keeps us from his complete wrath, and brings us into a place of peace with God, a wholeness.
So I think there is some confusion on what peace means. And so right now we've just talked about how first and foremost is the objective peace, the reconciliation with God. And then there is a peace, an inner wholeness that flows from that. Matthew 5:9 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And so we understand that those who have been called to have that wholeness with in themselves, resulting from their reconciliation with God, we are called to then exhibit this peace. Now, I think a lot of times when people think about exhibiting peace, it just means stop fighting. That's what it is. And I want to just kind of get into maybe the distinctions or the differences between what the world thinks is peace versus what the Bible defines as peace, or how the Bible tells us to be peacemakers. And so what is that difference that you see?
Yeah, I think the source is always God. That's the point. The source of peace, or true peace, is God. So if you don't have peace, it's because you don't have God. And if you have peace, it's because you have God. And so that's something that we need to distinguish, and make sure that people understand. If you don't have peace in your life and you claim to have God, then perhaps you don't have him. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
And so if we want, let's say, true, lasting, eternal peace, even in the Middle East, how do we do that? Jesus Christ. That's the only way. If you really want, Muslims and Jews to have peace, they need Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the only reconciliation between Isaac and Ishmael, between, the brothers and sisters in the Middle East, or anywhere in the world, to be honest. And we see that actually literally happening, because that's where we see Jesus Christ, through Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ in Matthew who continues to preach about how the Gentiles are being brought in. And Peter recognizes this, with the whole sheet of animals, or all sorts of four-legged animals coming down on a sheet. And God says, "Rise and eat." He says, "Surely not, God. I'm a God-fearing Jew. I wouldn't do that." But he does it again and again until Peter gets it.
Mm.
And that's one of those things we see, the reconciliation between the world with God is what leads the reconciliation between the world with itself. And so because God is the God who offers peace, we get to then offer peace to others. Without God, there is no true and lasting peace. There may be a truce, a temporary truce, but there's no lasting peace. And so if you really want lasting peace, it's only through God. And we see that this is evidenced in history where you continue to take God out of government, of even churches, fantastically. You know, that's such a spectacular thing to say, isn't it? To take God out of churches.
Yeah.
And so we're taking God out of churches by reciting like the Sparkle Creed or some nonsense like that now, or putting up BLM flags in our churches, rainbow flags. And because we're doing that, we're literally taking God out of a church. And you see enmity and strife grow between men as well. And so can I go on to the second part of peace that I wanted to talk about, which is in 1 Corinthians 14:33.
1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33 reads, "For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace."
So there is a contrast here given. Peace is about wholeness. It's about restoration of relationship. Yes, all those things. But it's also about order. It's understanding God's order and being able to live in God's order. We understand that order is great and it is given by God. Before God, there is no order. But with God, there is order. We can see that in creation. You know, before God, there was just, chaos. But with God, there's order. And so without God, you see a continual disintegration into chaos, a deconstruction, a decreation, if you will. But with God, there is order, and not just any kind of order. It is God's order, the order that lasts for eternity. And so I think that's the second dimension that I'd like to get to, that when we seek order, what we are seeking is peace. And how do you have true order? It's through God's peace. It's through God's order. And so one of the things that we also see from the peace of God is we see order not only in our individual lives, but again, it starts to go out from our individual lives to our families, to our communities, to the nation, and to the world. Christians bring order. Why? Is it because Christians are innately good in themselves? Or is it really because of the peace of God that is given to them that they also now get to live in, that they get to also share with others? And so that's why we even see 1 Corinthians 7, where, your offspring are made holy because of you. Why? Because they are living under your peace. They are living under your care, which is God's peace. So that's why we baptize our babies too, because your babies are living under your peace. They're living under God's order. They are effectively saved because of who you are until they come of age, when they're on their own, where they have to make their own recitement of that faith. And that's where you have confirmation in our, according to our, doctrines and beliefs. And so you have baptism and confirmation really being able to symbolize what we understand to be the peace of God reigning over our lives entirely in every dimension.
So would you say then that the practicing or the application of God's peace, that we have this wholeness through reconciliation with Him, is applied and practiced through obeying and promoting God's order?
Oh yeah,
Is that what you're
everything that
saying?
we saw in God's law, especially His moral law, points to His character, which points to order. God is not a God of confusion or disorder, but He is a God of peace. Why is that contrasted with each other? Because the opposite of peace is disorder. The opposite of peace is confusion. The opposite of peace is this kind of deconstruction that people are reveling in. People want the upturning of governments. They want the upturning of society, of democracy, of all these things, which produced what? It produced order. But because the order was somehow imperfect, again, we won't have perfect government order until Jesus Christ comes again. But there is, there is some levels of order. We can't even acknowledge that with our, critical legal theory or some critical theory that you have. So because you can't acknowledge it, our whole purpose now that we've been taught is to just upturn democracy because democracy is evil. But then replace it with what? They don't even know. You don't even know what you're going to replace it with, because your whole job is to tear down. Your whole job is to deconstruct, decreate, to disintegrate. without knowing what you'll end up as. But the Bible does tell us what we'll end up in. We'll end up in hell. We'll end up in that place where there is disorder and no peace. And so you will not have God's peace. And there you will find, like in James 3, it says, every kind of evil and disorder and practice. It's satanic. It's demonic. That's what we mean by hellish. And there you won't find peace. You won't find joy. You won't find happiness, because that's what peace brings. It brings a fullness of joy. And you'll never achieve what you think you'll get. You'll find more anger. And that's what we see in our society today, isn't it? Where we kind of upturn everything and you don't find more joy. People aren't happy when they root for Hamas. They're not overjoyed. They're angry, and the anger boils over and over and over again.
So what you're saying is that the way that we practice peacemaking is by obeying the commands of God and promoting his commands.
And I think it's a big faith issue in churches. By the way, if you love 1 Corinthians 14:33, you'll love 1 Corinthians 14:34. It's just the way it is. But
That's like a different...
Is it different though?
No, that's a different week is what I'm saying.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because we don't like 34, we'll reject 33 is my point.
I don't know who we is, but we is not me.
Well, that's a little Easter egg, if anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're one of your favorite holidays.
Not mine. Well, I love Easter in
Easter's
general.
Not a favorite holiday.
No, but on a shallow level, no. But so the reason why I ask how we practice peace is because oftentimes people in the world, and maybe even some Christians, think that peace is just kind of this lovey-dovey sparkle, I hug you, you hug me, we put our guns down type of situation. But the way that you have been explaining it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that is in essence just a truce is what it is. That's not really peace. That's not true peace. Sure, you might have a ceasefire for a little bit, but that's all it is. The only way to have peace is if you are reconciled to God, if you are made whole in him, and if you obey his commandments and promote his order as a God of order. That is the only way that you'll have peace, and that's the only way that we can, as Christians, promote and be peacemakers. Is that correct?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, though. Truce isn't bad.
No.
Truce is a good thing, but these good things point to the best thing. And so we want truce. We want, let's say, there to be a cease in violence, right? But to have that true and lasting peace, you need Jesus Christ, is what we are saying. So even temporary truces point us to a longing for an eternal peace. And that cannot come without, you being reconciled to God, number one. And then with the peace that God offers his children, you being able to spread it. So that's why, you see things like where God wouldn't even destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the most evil places recorded in the Bible, if there were just 10 righteous people there.
Yeah.
If there were just 10 righteous people, he wouldn't have destroyed it. And that's something that he vowed. Why is that? It's because the peace of God is that pervasive. It's that strong. It's that powerful that it can stay the hand of God's wrath and promote a truce. But that truce points to the eternal peace that people of God have. The righteous have that. And that's something that we want to show even in the world by, yes, having temporary truces, by promoting that, but because ultimately we want to promote the eternal peace with God, a wholeness, a harmony.
Right.
The je ne sais quoi that you like to say.
Ah, je ne sais quoi. Yeah. It's very French. Yeah.
But yeah, it's in everything. It's something that surpasses knowledge, but something that we have received.
So then I guess my question is, how do we put this all together? So we know that peace is only God-given and is practiced by obeying his commandments and promoting his commandments and his order. As Christians that see conflict in the world, and it might even be from a fight on the playground to countries warring against one another, how do we then fight for peace? Because that's a common slogan that people have, right? We fight for peace, fight for peace. How do we do that then, understanding that true peace only comes from God and only comes through reconciliation to him through Christ and the hope that comes from him? How do we put those two together?
Yeah, there is a greeting that Paul uses quite often in his epistles, and he says, peace, peace to you, but he says another word before it. What is that word?
Grace.
Grace. He says grace and peace to you. I think charisma can be taken a lot of ways, but it is a gift from God. Just as peace is a gift from God, grace is a gift from God. So the charisma is a gift from God. So what are the gifts from God that we receive so that we can have peace? He can give us giftings in terms of, ability.
Mm-hmm.
He can give us giftings in terms of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
He can give us giftings in terms of maybe even leadership. He has given gifts to each and every single member of the body. So I never want to discount that each member of the body has something to offer in terms of peace. And so I really like it. Most recently, because this is a podcast that we're recording now on November 10th. But most recently, a deacon came to me and he said, can we start a clothing program in our church for kids? And so this is brand new. This is literally hot off the press. Like
we've been dropping a lot of news lately.
It's nice stuff. So this is what he asked me. He said, could we start a CCGS?
CCGS, Children's Church Gathered and Scattered.
Children's Clothes Gathered and Scattered.
Oh.
So what he wants to do is
interesting.
He wants to take clothing that people might donate for kids or babies, and then put them in month categories. So 3 to 6 months, 6 to 1 year, and things like that. And then people can take from the bins as needed, because one of the biggest wastes of money that you will have when you have a baby is children's clothes.
Yeah.
Because you wear them for 2 months and they're gone, right?
Yep.
But instead of just throwing them out or not knowing what to do with it, if people don't want it, we can just have, one location where people can pick up.
Yeah.
You see, that's a gift that someone has, to see the need, but also to organize. That gift promotes peace within the community, because there is a hole, there is a lacking, there is a need, and that person can get to fill it. So this is not just some ephemeral kind of, distant spiritualness only talk that we're talking about here. It goes all the way down to the minutia of life. The peace of God is whole. It's everything. It is from the grand scheme of things. Peace with God. My spirit is dead to alive. That's absolutely true. But it also translates to the everyday humdrum, the mundane, and that is also glorious to God. I believe that even these little things that we do, picking up paper from the floor, washing tables after we've eaten and used it, throwing away paper plates that we may have used after we've eaten, all these things glorify God, because all of it is part of his order. God doesn't skip anything in this order. There's nothing that he doesn't care about. And so you'll see in the Bible things that people didn't put value on, like maybe if I drop another one, I don't know if I should. No, I'm talking about purity in the Edify talk.
I don't think that's been announced yet.
Yeah.
Oh, they're going to be mad about this one.
But what entails a woman being pure? And people just think it's about simply, it is, but simply sexual purity. And I'm going to argue that it's not. It's a holistic thing that is beyond what people in the world may think. When you hear the word pure, what do you think about? You simply think about one dimension. It's not. Purity and holiness is a whole dimension. It's about who you are as a person and how you act. You know who was really whole and pure that I really enjoy, that
Sam.
we read about recently in our staff? Sarah. Sarah is someone that was truly whole and pure, that is an exemplar of the faith that we read about in Hebrews. And so that's a model for women to look at. And even in 1 Peter 3 it says, if we follow her, we are her children. And so those are things that women have also been given. Men have been given exemplars of the faith. We as Christians, both brothers and sisters, have been given exemplars of the faith as a whole. So all these things have been given to us, from the great to the detailed, to even the atomistic levels of our daily lives, to glorify God. That's a wonderful thing that we can think about when we think about the peace of God. The peace of God isn't just this general thing that we can say, oh, I got it, and then move along with our lives. It affects everything about us. So when we offer the peace of God to someone else, that is an incredible thing that we're offering when we say the peace of God be with you, because it's everything. It's the universe and more. And when we say the peace of God be with you.
We understand that starting from the smallest of conflicts to the greatest of conflicts, we as Christians always are promoting non-conflict, right?
Ultimately. Right,
But,
because there is such thing as just war theory that the Christians have understood. There is standing your ground, defending your home, because ultimately it is for peace, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And peace in that definition is non-conflict, right? Because, obviously, ultimately, we want everyone to have the peace of Christ in them, those who are called. But while we're here on this earth, as we evangelize, we also fight for conflict to cease, correct?
Ultimately, yes.
Now, I want to just talk about maybe just being a peacemaker amongst our friends. How do we call for peace amongst our peers, especially when they, as they say, when they got that beef? Also, when they're gossipers, how do we squash that? If you gossip, cut it out. How do we do that? How do we promote peace?
Yeah. Well, first, you said the word peacemaker. It's one of the Beatitudes that Jesus says in his Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God."
Yeah.
And it's something that we should aspire to, long to be. We are called to be peacemakers. And the first thing is, the way you are a peacemaker is you bring the message of Jesus Christ, the gospel, message of the cross to people. Understand that it is by the blood of Jesus Christ you have been reconciled to God and the world. And so understanding that, we bring that reconciliation. We bring that reconciliation how? Again, through the order that God gives us. There is an order. There is an order of covering. There's an order of discipline. There is an order of all these things that God has shown us in his word, especially if they are in the church. So if they're in the church promoting disorder, then you have an obligation to correct that, because you are the ones that are responsible. Who is my brother's keeper? That kind of thing. You are responsible for each other. We're not like Cain, and my brother's after you've killed him, right? So we are not the wicked, because God says there is no peace for the wicked. So because we are sanctified, we are, peacemakers, we ought to understand that we continue on that reconciliation work, so to speak, that Christ has given us with one another. And so if there is something that is amiss, I would say you would bring it up. You can turn to Matthew 18:2 if you really wanted to understand how discipline works. First, you go alone, then you bring another brother, and then you take it to the church. And so we have defined that in specific terms in our church, where an elder is involved. And then if that even doesn't work, then we bring it to the church where there is an excommunication. There is a barring from the table and from the fellowship after that. Because why is excommunication and fellowship together? Because communion with God is fellowship with God. So if you don't have fellowship with God, we don't have fellowship together. That's why when we bar someone from the table, we don't have communion with each other either. That's why the table is so important. That's why when we have communion, when we take communion, we are saying that we have fellowship with God, we have faith in God, thereby we can have fellowship with one another. And so I don't see how people can think that I don't want to take communion with God, but I want to still be chill with people. That doesn't make any sense. Without fellowship with God, you don't have peace with one another.
Mm.
And so that's why fellowship with God is number one. You take that communion in faith. And if there's anything blocking you from taking communion, you repent. You do anything you can. You would go as far as to what Jesus said. You would leave your sacrifice at the altar. You made that miles and miles journey. And then you realize you have not been reconciled with your brother. You leave that and then you go back, reconcile, and then come back. That's how important that reconciliation is my point. And so you need to be reconciled with God, so that you can be reconciled with one another.
Yeah.
And that is not a small thing, just as our Lord Jesus said. It's a big thing where we continue to see that if you truly believe that you're reconciled with God, you will be reconciled with one another. It's in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That's a conditional statement. Because we have been forgiven, we forgive. Jesus also gives that parable of that wicked servant who had been forgiven like $1 gazillion, but then puts one of his compatriots into jail because he owes him $5. That's how petty you seem when you don't forgive one another. So when you see someone else doing that, you would implore with them, don't do this, brother. This is a terrible thing that you're doing, or sister, right? Where you are slandering, where you are gossiping, where you are tearing down order to promote the self, to boast of the self, to have pride or envy rule over your life rather than the peace of God.
So I guess my question is, how do we practically, and I know you gave the example of Matthew, where you go with one brother and then you go by yourself, then with another brother, then you bring to the church. How do we kind of do this? I think a lot of times people have trouble peacemaking. I think people have trouble or don't really know how to do it. They think that it's just stopping the conflict without truth oftentimes. And so how do we correctly do this? So for example, if Chunsuk was conflicting with me,
Conflicting with you.
Yeah, how do we practically do that? I think a lot of people find it difficult to do that, maybe find it awkward to do that. They would rather not, or they'd rather sit it out or, kind of wait for it to blow over. How do we deal with conflict in our church in our context?
Yeah, we pass the peace of Christ to one another. We are commanded to. We are it's not just a suggestion. I think this is what people don't understand. When we do the worship order and we recognize that passing the peace is something that God has ordained, that's something that we do joyfully. And yeah, it's rough. I think one of the things that I saw people do when we pass the peace is they specifically instruct people to go to people who they don't have peace with. That's super awkward, right? In our society today, you wouldn't want to do that, but that's something that is implied when we pass the peace of Christ to one another. Ultimately, you'll be in eternity with Jesus Christ and all the fellow believers. All the children of God will be with him. How can you have enmity with one another? It's an impossibility.
Yeah.
It's something that is not going to be existent in heaven. And so we practice that here. We practice what we know will exist in heaven. And so you are to forgive the person that you might not be cool with or might not be,
Hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory is a great word. I think that's a SAT word.
Is it? I didn't know that was a real word. I thought it was like a slang term.
It's not an SAT word.
Dang it.
Imagine you see hunky-dory and the next synonym is chill. Anyway, but yeah, it's something that we also do in faith. So how do you forgive people? It's by faith you forgive people. You understand that you have to trust in God, that God is working in his children just as he is working in you.
Yeah.
And so when you have, beef with someone else, another SAT word, beef.
No, beef is a real word though. Cow meat.
When you have beef with someone else, and this is not like the lean beef, we're talking about like the 80-20, 75-25 beef. Yeah.
Nobody wants that beef.
When you have that kind of beef with somebody, how can you actually forgive that person when you believe that you have been wronged?
Yeah.
How can you offer peace, extend peace to the person? Well, you offer peace, you extend peace because you've been commanded to. And also, you point out the wrong in the other brother's life. Like, this is the wrong that you've done. Just like in Matthew 18, the peace of God that we offer is not just simple, just words that we're saying. We're not just offering up words and not meaning it in our hearts, but this is something that we truly believe that God is doing. It's faith in God that leads us to forgive one another. It's understanding that God will complete the work in all his saints. And guess what? If you suffer unrighteously, just like it says in 1 Peter 3, then it's great because God will honor that suffering.
Yeah.
But don't
yeah.
suffer because you deserve it. That's a bad
Right.
way to suffer. Is basically I'm summing up 1 Peter
Yeah.
chapter 3. Why would you suffer when you deservedly? Why would you want to do that if you were going to suffer? And you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
Suffer undeservedly. Suffer because of your righteousness. Now, if you suffer because you're forgiving someone and that person continues to wrong you, God is the one that will honor you. God is the one that will lift you up. And if you truly believe that that person is a brother or sister in Christ, God is also the one that will bring that person into repentance. And a lot of times also you realize maybe you're not, all that righteous either. And so you could also find that there's something to glean and to learn from that situation where you will further your sanctification. And there are all these benefits to following what the Lord prescribes. I hope that people realize that when we follow the word of God, it is entirely for our good, and that gives him glory.
So what you're saying is during the passing of the peace that we have in our liturgy, if someone comes from across the sanctuary to pass the peace to you, they got that beef with you. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Who do you expect to come across?
Nobody. Because
so many people.
Nobody
The
will.
coming Sunday, we'll watch.
Be
So
Brian.
many people will stand up and come to you and offer the peace of God,
Not going to be
Yeah.
dodging people. But
thereby directly going against the word of God.
no. That's not what I meant. What I meant was because I have peace with everybody already, there's no need. You know what I'm saying? There's no
Maybe
need.
they don't have peace with you.
But how do we? So you brought up the passing of the peace. I think a lot of times people have some confusions about it. Like, what do I do? Do I sit here awkwardly? Do I extend my hand? Do I give the peace up sign? Like, how do I pass the peace? What do I say? Do I say shalom? Do I say peace be with you? Do I say my peace I give to you? Like, what
My
do you-
peace I give to
Yeah,
you.
what do you?
Are you Jesus?
No. I'm just saying people might not know what to do during that time, and people might feel awkward. And I know you gave a teaching about it, but could you just give us a reminder of what we're supposed to be doing, what we're supposed to be thinking about, how we do this during the passing of the peace portion of our liturgy?
Yeah, I think passing of the peace in our liturgy, first, we are reminded that it is God's peace that he gives us and that we are now able. That means we have been given the task to pass the peace to others. And so it's an exercise of that. It's an exercise in that moment in time and space, yes, but also for the rest of our lives. In the other aspects and dimensions of our lives, we live out as peacemakers, passing that peace to others. And so those are the things that we get to see. And yeah, I think it's going to be awkward if you have, beef with people in the congregation at the time. But you have to solve that. You have to resolve that. You have to be able to offer the peace because it's God who forgives them. So you also forgive them, just like the parable of that wicked servant who was not able to forgive someone who had, a $5 debt to them. They would throw him in jail for that. Why would you do that? That's when you look at it, people are like, that's insane. That's the same thing when you don't forgive someone else. And so someone that is like that, we understand that God will discipline them. God will punish them. And so for the fear of God, in the very least, should propel you to obey God. Because, if you are a believer, God disciplines those that he loves. He loves you. That's why he'll discipline you. But no one says, please give me this discipline, because it's going to be harsh. It's going to rip you apart. But he'll form you up again. And if need be, you would do that. But only a fool would say, I just want to get ripped apart all the time. That's stupid. But if need be, yeah, you need to be ripped apart to be built back up again. But you need to continue to build yourself. And if you're wise, then you continue to build yourself. And know that God will rip you where, he will tear down what needs to be torn down. And that's, in humility, in meekness, with obedience, you take that. But like you said, what does that portion of our liturgy do? It points to that moment in space and time, yes, but it also points to outside that space and time and moment. So we start from Sunday. The Christian's life always starts from Sunday, and it starts from Sunday worship. The passing of the peace starts at that moment in that space and time, and it spreads, and it lasts, and it goes throughout the week wherever God sends us. That's why we are the church gathered and scattered.
So I think people might have confusion because what are you passing? Like, what do you mean you're passing the peace? Like,
you're passing the shalom?
Yeah, like what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. It means that we offer the peace that we have, but also we wish the peace of God also beyond them that we
Gotcha.
have. So there's two things. So because I have peace, I can offer peace with you. That means I don't have any enmity toward you, but actually I will help you in your wholeness, in your growth, that kind of thing. That's what it means to covenant with one another. But it also means I wish you would have this wholeness, and I wish you would also have the ability to pass it. So that's actually a good question. So that's what we do. That's what we mean when we offer the peace of God to one another.
That's what I do. I only ask good questions. But I think, so what you're saying then is, and this is like a spicy one, if you have beef with somebody, then this Sunday, it is biblical for you to go and pass the peace with that somebody. If you don't, you're disobeying the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh,
you're disobeying God. Yeah, you shouldn't have beef with anybody, especially in the church. These are your local body members that are closest to you. You're not going to have peace with anybody in the world. You can't even be close to people that God has put next to you. You're not going to be close to anybody.
Oh, man.
You can't obey your parents. You're not going to obey the government. You're not going to obey any authority that God places over your lives. Their father and mother are your first authority figures that you are to obey and to honor. Yeah, we won't get into that one. But yeah, God places those that are close to us to test us, to show us where we are lacking, to sharpen us. God gives brothers to sharpen each other, to really make us razor sharp. And so that's what we are. We are here. And if you can't even do that, then man, in the battlefield with other people, you're going to fail big time.
Then if it's unbiblical and if we're disobeying God, if we're not passing the peace, how seriously or how literally do we take Matthew 5:21-26? And I'll read that for us. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. So, does that mean then, this is even before passing of the peace in our service, before you even get to church, should you be reconciling with your brother or sister that you have beef with?
Absolutely. Before, during,
don't even
after.
come to church then if
No.
you don't?
No. You have to come to church, but before. The whole point is do it before. Okay, so here's our purpose. One of the purposes that we have is from 2 Corinthians 5:18. How about that?
2 Corinthians 5:18 reads, all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation.
Yeah, we are ministers of reconciliation because God has given us reconciliation through Christ. And so one of your primary jobs, one of your primary ministries is to reconcile. If you're not reconciled personally, you're not going to bring reconciliation anywhere else. You're just going to continue to bring disorder, chaos, enmity, all this pain. You're not going to do God's work. You're going to do Satan's work. You're going to be a gossiper, slanderer. Again, a gossiper, slanderer in the Greek is diabolos, right? Where we get diablo. It's the work of the devil. And so those are things that we get to see clearly in the Bible. You're going to do the work of the devil. How can you, as a minister, let alone a child of God, do the work of the devil rather than the work of God? The work of God is not to tear down, but it is to build up, and it's to reconcile. It's to promote peace. So yes, all of that is true. Before, during, after, obey God in every way. If you refuse to reconcile, don't even come to service, because what you're doing is you're not a Christian. That's the point. Why would you even come? That's a pretty heavy statement, but that's not me who said it.
No.
And so if you are a Christian, you are a peacemaker. That is your job. But I get that it can be very difficult. So one of the things that we also understand in the church is that we see a growth in sanctification. So if you haven't reconciled with someone in the past, it doesn't mean you weren't Christian. It means that God brings us up in the knowledge of who He is, and He brings us to a place where we are able to do more and more of His will. So we are now people who are growing in Christ, who understand what God has commanded of us, and through His grace and the power of His Holy Spirit, we are able to do those things which He commands us. So if you think this is impossible, then this is something that you need to really come to terms with in prayer, in fasting, and in all seriousness, because this is what God commands you. And when you do, you will find that God will give you the strength to do what He commands. It's not an impossible thing. And so, we laid it out in heavy terms where, we can say even you're not a Christian if you refuse to do so, blah, 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 and all that stuff. But if we, it's not to deny that it's going to be very difficult to reconcile. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's say, let's give an example. If you had an ex-girlfriend of yours.
Who's you?
Just you. I'm not looking at anybody.
You're staring into my soul.
But you had an ex-girlfriend that you need to reconcile with correctly because you did them wrong. That's something that you'd want to do.
I mean, I'm getting hyped up because I think I love this type of conversation, because now what we're saying is, if you do not resolve your conflict before you come to church, then you are disobeying God. If you do not pass the peace to someone that you may have beef with, who you should have already resolved before the service began, you are also disobeying God.
Yes. And we are also people who extend grace to others. We are not ones that, bring down the hammer, We are the ones that offer grace. So I think people are like, you're disobeying God. When are you going to excommunicate them? It's like, what? It's like, I didn't know that was like the first go-to of people. Our first go-to always is to encourage, to, stand alongside them, to weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And to really walk with them in all these things, because you were once weak too. And so that understanding needs to be there. The excommunication part is when the church can no longer affirm in any way that this person is a Christian. And so that's where it will get to that extreme. But that extreme, I don't think comes lightly like what people think. So I hope that wasn't implied by you. I don't think it was, but I think some listeners may have thought that this is what we might imply. So I just want to make that clear. We encourage people. We stand alongside people. And if you are a Christian, you want to be ultimately reconciled with one another, because that is pointing to your reconciliation with God.
Yeah, no one said it wasn't easy. I think, wait, what? No one said it wasn't hard, is what I meant. No one said it wasn't difficult.
It's all the same thing. Arduous.
Well, that's a big word. It means difficult. So we are called to be peacemakers. We are called to pray for the ceasing of violence. And I think with that being said, I want to just quickly go into current events. And today's current events is I fear, as we often do, as we did with Afghanistan, as we did with any other world tragedy and conflict, I fear that when the news isn't hot, when the news isn't constant, we as human beings tend to forget what's happening around the world. And we go back to, as they say, buying shoes. There was a book title, I think, that said, "The world's on fire and you're buying shoes." And we tend to forget these things that are happening across the world, and we just focus on our day-to-day tasks. And our biggest stressor is the fact that we couldn't find our car keys, which actually is a big problem, though. But because that happened to me once. But
I bet.
I guess I don't really lose things, but recently with age, it's been pretty constant.
That literally happened to me this morning.
You lost your car keys?
Yeah,
Where was it?
in my gym bag. I was running around the house. It was crazy.
Was it crazy?
This is a great story.
Sounds like,
I appreciate this being in the
sounds like a
podcast.
crazy morning.
What a crazy morning.
But I guess my question is, though, like we just said, and we as Christians, we are peacemakers. How do we continue to pray for peace? How do we continue to remember to pray for peace? How do we continue to stay the course and persevere in praying for those who are around the world? And I think another thing is we tend to feel bad when we forget. And when we feel the need to pray for every conflict that's going on in the world. So how do we wisely discern how to pray, when to pray, what to pray?
There's all these things in the news that are happening.
Yeah.
And as it happens, you can be led into prayer. You can pray, especially for our brothers and sisters in the world that are suffering. That's not something that makes it to the news all the time.
No.
And so we definitely know of Afghans that are Christian, that are suffering, that are being persecuted, that are being killed. And so, yeah, that's always been in my heart. And I think this is one of the things where we see politics mixed in with real life world things where people don't want to talk about politics, but it really is. Our pullout from Afghanistan was a disaster. That is an understatement. It was a tragedy, and what it did to our, not just for us in the world stage, what it did to the U.S., but I'm talking about in the Christian world, where our Christian brothers and sisters are literally crying out for help, and that we can't do anything about it, unless you just fly over there and put yourself to pretty certain death to do nothing. Those are things that I think would propel someone to continue to pray. And so there are all these things that are happening around the world, and maybe you can't take it all in at once. So our church, what we try to do is maybe just parse it up and divvy it up and pray for one thing at a time. And so even within the last year, we did the top 50 persecuted nations in the world with the World Watch list, right?
Yeah.
And so we would pray for each nation, and especially for our brothers and sisters in the faith that are living in those nations that are being persecuted. We lift them up in prayer. And so those are healthy things that we can do in response.
Thank you for that. I guess ending on a lighter note, we're going to go into a quick Q&A.
We need a beat.
What you got in the bag? What you got in the bag?
What you got in the bag?
And the question for this morning is, Pastor Eugene, what would you like for Christmas? And what did you get for your birthday?
Well, my birthday technically didn't pass yet, so I don't know what I got for my birthday.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah. It's November 10th. So,
As we record.
yeah. But what I would like for Christmas is for our sanctuary to be completed so that we can worship there. I
That'd
think
be
that would be
great.
quite, I think that'd be quite significant. That's something that I would really enjoy.
Yeah, that would be great. I would like a PS5, but I would also like the sanctuary to be.
Yeah, I have like zero desire for a PS5. I don't even know what a PS5 would give me.
There's
But
a
I heard
Spider-Man
about the
2 game.
Spider-Man game that
Yeah.
has like an Unreal
Loading time.
engine where your
Yeah.
movements are like more realistic than real world. I don't even know what that is.
Like you're almost Spider-Man himself.
Like you have the laws of physics don't apply to Spider-Man apparently. You like web buildings that don't exist and you make turns that are
Yeah.
impossible without
Yeah.
like super magnetic fields all around you.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing what he can do. Thank you for that. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. Join us next week as we discuss accountability. You know, we talked about peacemaking today, and we're going to continue on in this. What would this series be? Like Christian things? No. Or
Like
what?
a living in community type of
Living
thing.
in community.
Oh, see, that's why we have a producer.
You know what? I don't like
He's
that
so
one.
creative.
How about living in Christian community?
Not the TNET community.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about living as a Christian community, and that is our little mini series that we got going on. Tune in next week to find out. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith.
Peace.
Peace.